Now, for me, today, we're going to talk about the daylilies. It's my new craze. I just want them everywhere. Now, a daylily looks like this. Now, this is slightly maroon, but I have a few others that are coming out as yellow. And these beautiful flowers, look at their heads. They're always pointing upwards. And the thing is that they have this long scape, they call it. Actually, it's a stem that has no leaves, and all its leaves are at the fan. Now, the thing about this daylily, it flowers in the morning. By the next evening, it withers and dies, especially like this. But the beauty is when you clump them all together, so you don't notice that you've only got one daylily that is happening. But when you do put a whole lot together, what drama would that show you? Though it's called a lily, it doesn't come from bulbs, it comes from rhizomes, and that makes it more interesting. So welcome back to my channel. My name is Alice and I'm the Red Soil Gardener. Let's get into my craze today. Now, what gardeners say is that the daylily is the perfect perennial. The reason why is basically it is drought resistant. It can actually manage frost, and basically maintenance is you hardly have to do anything, and that's why they call it the perfect perennial. Now, the thing about the daylily, it loves full sun. As long as it gets 6 hours of full sun, it is happy. And if it does get less than 6 hours of sun, what happens is it becomes leggy and it starts flopping. So always give the daylily full sun. Now, in many countries, I mean, with the daylily, you get blooming season. So the best time to actually plant your daylily is in spring. Now, what happens is that if it gets its full requirement, which is the full sun, and you must water it maybe once a week, but it doesn't require water that often, some of the plants will get one blooming season, but other plants will get 2 seasons if you meet the requirement. But you must realize that there are many cultivars, hybrids out there, and it's best to go and ask your nursery what are the conditions for this particular daylily. Now, what I've done is I've actually, as usual, I've uprooted daylilies, and I wanted us to look at the structure of the roots and just to understand it, and then you know exactly how you're going to go about propagating. First of all, let's go down to the soil. It likes a well-drained soil. Make sure that when you do have your soil, first of all, that it is aerated and you can put your perlite in there. And second thing is just let the water drain right through and then leave it like that. But with daylilies is that once it does get dry, then you water, because basically they are drought resistant and they flourish in full sun. So it's not a matter of every few days you're watering the plant. They will manage themselves. And if you do plant your daylilies, try to avoid planting them too close to a big tree. Like we have this massive jacaranda here. If I did plant my daylilies underneath it, the daylily will compete with the tree for the water. So I wouldn't do that. Find a lovely empty patch in your garden. And then also what's beautiful about daylilies, clump them all together and make sure you have about 18 inches apart, because all this foliage will go over. But make sure you put them all together, because the drama is when they all flower, and some will flower at different times, because the flower only survives for one evening. In the morning, next morning, the flower is gone. So try to clump them together so that you have full blooms all the time, and also you have that drama when you see those lovely colors. So what we're going to do now is let's look at the daylily, because the thing about the daylily, it's very different from most lilies, is that it doesn't grow from a bulb, it grows from a rhizome. And we've talked about rhizomes so many times. And once you do understand rhizomes, it's actually quite simple, because that's where the babies spring out from. So I'm going to open this up, and then we'll have a look at it and look at the rhizome. And then from there we understand it, and then we can start looking at the propagation. So I'm just going to put this one aside. Right, so this is what a daylily would look like. It has a fan. If you notice, this is the fan, and all of them fan out. Now, when we turn it upside down and look between the rooting, you will notice that you get a rhizome. That is a rhizome, and basically from there, that's where you get your babies from. And so once you do get your babies and they start fanning out, that is exactly what you're going to propagate. Again, we look at this one, this daylily. And if you look at it again, there's your rhizome here. And again, from this one is where all the babies are going to come from. Once the baby does form its own rhizome, it's ready to separate from the mother plant. And once it does form its rhizome, that means it's able to feed itself, because within the rhizome, that's where all the nutrients are, and that's how it can survive. Now, basically is that when you're going to uproot to multiply your stock of your daylilies, I had mentioned earlier, is that daylilies love to be in a clump. So you will get a whole load of fans all stuck together. Now, what happens is that dig it out with a spade, really dig it out for propagation purposes. And then what you do is just get a knife and divide it. Once it does get that division and you separate, and now you create your stock, is basically the daylily gets rejuvenated and it starts building up again. So usually we say every 5 years, once the clump is big, take it out and divide it, and you will make many more babies and get many more blooms. So what I've done here, let me just clean this table, is so we have the clumps. So all you do is, I have 2 fans here, is if you can't pull it off with the rhizome, do get a knife and slice it off and make sure the rhizome is there. So what I'm going to do is you just snip it, and the baby has a rhizome, and this is the mother plant. So now what we're doing is that we've snipped that one off, and again the same thing here. Sometimes it's easier to just pull it off, as in this case I'm just going to pull this one off. And although this does have a baby starting from the rhizome, I'm just going to leave it like that because I don't want to disturb it, and also it looks too young. And then again we have this one which just fell off, and it has its own rhizome, so it'll do well for planting. So now what we're going to do with this plant is, first of all, is that there's a lot of foliage there, and as we saw before when we did even the irises, it's better to just snip it, so more energy goes into the production of the roots and settling down, as opposed to giving too much energy to the leaves. So what I'm going to do is actually take this and snip them and make my fan. Here you go. 1 fan, 2 fan, 3 fan, 4 fan, my little baby. Oh. So I have my baby here. So now when you do want to plant this, which later I will plant in the garden, but just for this purpose I will plant it here, and then in 2-3 days time I will move it into the garden, is I would actually cut a bit of the rooting, so that even as you plant, I know I do that sometimes, fold the roots in. So what happens with this is basically, as we mentioned, is that this plant is actually quite tolerant to drought. And it's just that the rooting, what happens is that it stores water in its roots, and so you get that. So even in a way is that if it doesn't receive water, it can actually live off that tuber. So basically what we're saying is, out of my 2 plants that I've shown you, I've actually got 4, 5, 6 plants, and of which I am going to put it in here, in this moist soil, and wait for it to be planted in the garden. So I'm going to take this one and just put it in, and I will take this one and put it here. This is just a transition until I decide where I'm going to put it. Take this one, I'm going to just stick it in here. Use my hands, and just to make sure that when you do put the soil, your crown, this bit, doesn't go under the soil. Just make sure that the crown is not submerged. And of course, the other thing, as we mentioned earlier, is when you do put it in your garden, make sure about 18 inches, because it will have a lot of foliage, and also it will reproduce, and so you will strangle the plant. So just make sure your distancing when you do plant is ideal. So I'm going to leave it here until I decide where I'm going to put it. And there is a place that I plan to put all my daylilies. And again, it gets morning sun, so it gets its 5-6 hours, and it will flourish, and we can follow that on Instagram. The other thing what I'd like to mention is that also when we're doing propagation, especially when I'm dealing with rhizomes and everything, sometimes as we plant straight away, is that we should actually allow the plant to air dry and get a callus. In that way, you're actually protecting the rhizome from other infections in the soil, fungal or whatever. So that could be also a good suggestion for you when you're dealing with propagation of a plant. Now the thing is that also with this plant is that as you get all this foliage, it's good to go in it once it does bloom, once it does all the foliage, is to clean out all the dead leaves, which always falls to the bottom. Also, deadheading is also very good. Go right to the bottom of the stalk and remove it at the base, because the stalk of the daylily does not have any leaves on it. So when you do want to do a deadhead, just go down to the where the stalk starts near the crown and just snip it, and you will get more blooms. Also during winter is that what you do is that, as we said, the daylily is actually a very hardy plant, and it is drought resistant and it can cope with frost. But in areas where you do get really deep frost, I would actually, before the frost comes in, is if it's not in a big area, I would just uproot it and use this time to actually do your subdivision and keep your rhizomes in your basement or your cupboard. However, in an area where if you have it in your garden and you don't feel like uprooting it, is let this foliage, which starts as yellow and it does slowly as the winter comes in, it will all dry out. You could leave it on the ground, the rhizomes, and have this foliage that is just dried out on top. And then you could add other insulating like hay on top of it, so that you're actually protecting your rhizome. Then in spring, as you see the plant rejuvenating, is what you do, just dig it up around the side, put some compost and mulch it so it just gets more rejuvenated, and basically you're good to go. So there you go. I hope you've learned something, and do get your daylilies. Summer is coming, and do put them in your garden. There's so many different hybrids. I was just looking at the pictures of these flowers, which we don't get these hybrids in Kenya, but they are stunning, and it is the most simplest plant to look after, because you don't really have to go in there and keep maintaining it. It just looks after itself. So thank you, fellow gardeners. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you've learned something, and don't forget to like, to share, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It really means a lot to us. And don't forget to press that notification button so you'll always be informed. Do follow us on Instagram. We do post tips. We do post lovely flowers wherever I go, and also don't forget to DM us, because we're always there to comment and to assist, and also share your ideas. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.